Hello and welcome to another edition of the Not Too Stuffy Law Show. I'm your host, Attorney Justin St. James. For the next half hour, we hope to entertain, inform, and enlighten you. And if we don't, you should probably be watching America's Funniest Home Videos. I'd like to welcome our studio audience. Looks like we've really gone to the dogs this time. In this episode, we'll continue our trip into cyberspace. If you watched episode 2, you saw the first half of my interview with Harold Belbin. As a reminder, Harold is the principal security engineer for the company Visiting Geeks in Merrimack, Massachusetts. In this episode, I continue my conversation with Harold, where he discusses privacy issues on the web. From advertisers to insurance companies to college admissions, we'll find out how the information you put out there may be used against you. So be careful. Once again, here's Harold Belbin. Well, you bring up a good point. Even not only businesses, but also schools, school computers and library computers. I go to the library every once in a while and use a computer there. And I've never used my credit card on a public library computer, but I imagine they have to be careful with what they do with their computers too when it's time to get rid of them.
Public computers can have a lot of information on them.
Sure.
Any public computer, you want to be careful about what you use. In the particular case of credit card transactions, interesting little tidbit of information is that anytime nowadays it's standard, and it has been for quite some time, that all connections into financial institutions are encrypted. And if you look at your browser, whenever you make a secure connection, there'll actually be a little padlock somewhere on the screen that will tell you that it's encrypted. Or if you look at the address, the URL where you've gone, you'll see it'll change from HTTP to HTTPS. And that S means secure, and it's encrypted. And that's encrypted from your computer all the way to the other server. So the entire connection, the whole length of the way, is encrypted. So somebody could technically capture that information moving across the network somewhere, but it wouldn't make any sense because it's all encrypted. It wouldn't be readable to them. So credit card transactions are inherently much, much safer because the systems to protect them have been in place for a long time, and it's been in companies' best interest to protect that transaction. The risk now, and after you see things like, what was the big company I just lost? 40 million credit cards or something, TJ Maxx and a couple of the others. And those were actually the motivators for this new law. What you find is the actual credit card transaction exchange, criminals don't even look at that anymore because it's too difficult to deal with. They just try to hack right into the database. So they figure out who the company is. And this is all Google information. You can do Google on any company. You can find out what their physical address is. You can find their internet address. With a little bit of research and a little bit of feeling around at that location, you can figure out what kind of equipment they are. And if you're really good at what you do and you know what you're doing, you can get past their firewalls, get past their security, get to that database server, and get access to the data that resides on that computer. And in the old days, that data wasn't encrypted. It just sat there as like reading the phone book. So what they're doing now is this law has forced these companies to encrypt this data on that server. So even if you break through all the layers of security and you get to the box, even when you get the data, you can't do anything with it because if you don't have the key to unlock it, it's just junk.
So it's almost like a code. You can't read it because it's only special, right?
It is, and that's been a wonderful thing. I mean, that's the thing that security people have been talking about for years and years. And we've always had business people telling us, well, it costs an awful lot. Well, you want to do business with me, I think you kind of owe me protecting my personal information that I've trusted you with.
Now, is this also where identity theft comes in? Is a good chunk of identity theft through the internet? Or, I mean, there are other things people can, of course, try to look over your shoulder while you're putting your PIN in at the grocery store, but I imagine a lot of it might come from people just browsing the web and trying to get information that way, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Identity theft took on a whole new dimension with the internet because there's so much information. And I think in a lot of ways, the information you need to get credentials, they've had to completely redo how they issue a passport, how they issue a driver's license, social security cards. Because with any of those three forms of information, I can get any kind of financial credit card, credit account, buy a car. that information becomes child's play. Because when you get on the internet and I start doing a lot of searches, I can come up with your address, your telephone number, your name, how long you live there. So I have a large portion of the information that I need to pretend to be you already. And so the next pieces that I need are, driver's license number, or I need a social security card or number. But because there's oftentimes so many people with the same name, if I can get a list of social security numbers, I can probably fake my way through it. Because it may not be you, maybe somebody else, but they have the same name, different social security number. It can still wind up on your credit report. You used to see it all the time where they would say, you need to check your credit report once a year to see if stuff wound up on there that didn't belong to you. And I've always been a believer in that. Since it's free, I do it every year. And every year, I find something on my credit report that's not me. It's some other Harold Belbin or some other company or whatever the case happens to be. And it's not even my address. Like sometimes you'll see on your credit report an address shows up on your credit report and you go, how'd that happen? And it turns out that the companies somehow crossed the data over. And so these mistakes happen all the time. And so if it's easy to have mistakes, it's easy to trick the system. And that's where identity theft comes in. These criminals, and I don't profess to know all the intricacies of how a lot of these characters are stealing identities, but it makes a lot of sense when you look at a lot of the little pieces of data and what pieces I need to get a credit card or to get a car loan, or in the old days you get a mortgage.
I'm not trying to put anybody out of business, but when you said that, I was thinking of all the companies that are advertising about protect your identity, sign on with this company, and we'll notify you when we'll notify you if someone's trying to use your information, that sort of thing. Are those companies worth investing in, or is it just, as you say, is it just as good to get your own credit report and?
Well, I think because of the speed at which things happen on the internet now, I think that I didn't used to believe in them. I'm believing in them more and more now. I think that at some point, because your credit history and your reputation on the internet and with your credit file becomes so important, I think it becomes important to have something automated that's monitoring this critical information that belongs to you.
Okay.
A common thing that I hear from a lot of people, because I'm constantly telling people, be careful what you put out there, and a lot of people's common reply is, well, I'm not that important. Why would anybody want my data? And even if they got my data, so what?
What do they do with it?
What do they do with it?
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of reasons why they want your data. One is they can build a personality profile, and that's what these companies are doing. This is why they're saving and accumulating all this data about your behavior. Anything you do on the internet nowadays is pretty much being monitored and saved and cataloged, and it's being analyzed. They're looking for patterns because these companies make their money based on advertising revenues.
Remember you told me the story about how if someone does a Google search, say for Mustangs, Mustang cars, then that it sends that information to Google. Have I got that correct?
Yep, absolutely.
And so then Google in turn has this information about this user at this computer at this location was recently looking up Mustangs.
Absolutely.
And it might give it to Ford or dealerships or who?
Well, they can sell it. They can do whatever they want.
Okay.
There's actually a couple of pieces to that puzzle. Google gets paid for referrals based on, for example, all right, so let's say we go to Google and we say vacation, if I could spell it. So let's pick vacation, Caribbean islands. Okay, so when you're looking at this browser window, along the top here, see where it says sponsored links?
Yes.
That sponsored links means that's an advertisement. Okay? See all the way down the right-hand side of the page here? Sponsored links.
Right.
Those are paid advertisements. Those companies are paying Google to put those ads on there. Now, I did a very simple thing. I did a Google search on Caribbean vacation. Okay? because Google is monitoring what I'm doing, all of a sudden, all the and these are dynamic advertisements. Every time you refresh the page, they'll be different. Google already knows I'm interested in vacations, and it is targeting me with advertisements from companies that are involved somehow in vacations. And look at how quick it was. Now, our real results start at this Caribbean Islands entry right there, okay? And if we look down, you can see that these are real results in our Google search results list, but those are ads. On the right-hand side and across the top of the browser are targeted ads. It's called behavioral advertising. And what they do is they look at the patterns, they look at what you search for, how long you search for it. Because the longer you search for it, the more important it must be to you. The more valuable these click-through links become, because these companies pay anywhere from a penny to $50 or $100 if I click on their link and I go to their website. I don't have to buy anything. All I have to do is click on it. And so when you start looking at the amount of money that resides in this advertising on here, this is why Google does the billions of dollars of business that it does every year, because they're being paid by all these advertisers. Well, in order for advertisers to know who to target, they need to collect information about you and your behavior. So I know that, and it's not just on web searches, it's in any free email. If it's Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo Mail, any of those free things, they are reading your email and they are saving that information. In fact, in some of the companies, and I'm not going to name them specifically just because it's very difficult to prove a lot of this stuff, but when you see it 20 or 30 times, it starts to look like a pattern to me. They're saving your actual edits. So let's say, for example, I open up my browser window and I log into my free email account at one of these places, and I start to type an email, and it can be about whatever subject. It could be about vacations, just to keep it simple. Gee, it'd really be nice to get away this month. I'd like to go to the Turks and Caicos, and you put that in your email, and as soon as you get done with that, and the page refreshes, they've saved the content that you've put in there. And if you notice, your advertisements along the top and the right-hand side of the browser all of a sudden reflect the content of your private email. There is no privacy in email. They are reading it and they are saving it and they are monitoring and they are analyzing and they're trying to figure out, how do I get your money out of your wallet? That's what's taking place on the internet right now. It is extreme. Most people would not tolerate the level of invasion to your privacy at home that takes place on the internet. If you saw somebody walk over to your house and open your mailbox and pull your mail out of your mailbox and open all your letters and read them and make photocopies and then take the copies with them, I'd say you'd be upset. But that's exactly what's taking place when you're on the internet. When you're using free email services, when you're browsing the web, they are going through your behavior, your activity. They're reading your thoughts. I mean, the part that, and so there's all this information, and right now it's just targeted at advertising dollars. The thing that scares me and a lot of security people is what happens with this data down the road. I've now been on the internet 15 years. I'm sure they got a big pile of information on me somewhere. And it may not be that interesting, I'm sure. But at some point, maybe I say something in an email. Maybe I went to the doctor's office. And I had good news. I don't have cancer. But it's in an email now. And I've sent it to my spouse or to my family or whatever. That information is now saved for 20 or 30 years. Who's to say that in 10 or 15 years from now, that an insurance company doesn't buy that data and looks through and says, Harold, he thought he had cancer 10 years ago. I'm not going to insure him anymore. Exactly. And there are no laws preventing that at this point in time. Because the information was gathered in a public forum, there's no expectation of privacy. Anything that you say in a public forum, there's no expectation of privacy or protection of any form.
But it's almost a double-edged sword. A double-edged sword. I saw an ad recently about a company. They were advertising how well, I'll give you the setup. This gentleman was sitting talking with his physician, and they were talking about this particular person's history, and all of a sudden we see that he's sitting on stage in an auditorium, and in the audience, the entire audience is filled, and you've got all of his previous physicians sitting in the audience, and they're all saying, oh yes, we had that checkup in 1982 when he was cleared of that. And then another physician stood up and said, oh yeah, he had his appendix taken out in 1975, and he's good to go. And the ad was trying to say, well, it's more convenient for physicians now to have your medical history on the internet. And okay, on the one thing that's good, on the other hand, as you're suggesting, maybe it's not such a good idea.
Well, there's a couple of, there's some fine lines to that. I know the ad you're talking about, it's a great ad, by the way. And what they are talking about is the ability of hospitals and medical facilities to securely share your medical information, x-rays, et cetera. There is a lot of good that could come out of that. What we're talking, there's two types of data. There's data that's well protected, and because of some of the regulations like HIPAA and Gramm-Leach-Bliley and some of the others that protect medical information, you can't just share that stuff on the internet. However, that doesn't say that in a public forum, such as a Google search or on a free email service, they can't capture your medical information secondhand somehow. So in other words, you're writing a letter to your spouse talking about something that you got away with, or something that I don't have cancer, that information, they can do whatever they want with it. Information that resides in a medical database that's protected by, a medical company, whether it be an insurance company or your hospital or your doctor's office, that information is not being shared. But that's not to say that at some point, because insurance companies always want to see more. They always want as much information as they can because, an actuary, that's how an actuary writes an insurance policy. They look at all the information. They say the odds are, okay, here's how much your premium's going to be. Well, if they can see that you've had a couple of close scares with cancer, that means your probability of coming on with cancer is much higher than someone else. That is free information that you volunteered in a public forum. And that's why we were talking about earlier, how important it is to be careful about what you say in email or on a website or on a blog or whatever the case happens to be. It's not that you shouldn't use it, because the internet is clearly one of the most amazing technological advancements of human civilization ever. If you think of how fast information is moving right now. I mean, before you used to have to write a book, and the book took years to write, months to publish, and then years to sell enough copies where anybody actually read it, unless you were fortunate enough to write a really interesting book. Now, that same information, I can post something on the internet and 1 million people can read it by tomorrow morning. Mm-hmm. It happens every day. I mean, if you go to most of the news outlets, they have, at the bottom of any given news story, there'll be comments from the readers. And my God, the things people say, it's a bit disturbing. It's like, all right, you guys all need therapy, But, that information spreads that fast. It's amazing. If you look at a lot of the politics that has taken place in the last couple of years in Massachusetts, look at Scott Brown's election. Mm. At least half of that was driven electronically. President Obama's campaign, huge internet presence, huge electronic exchange of information, changed the game forever. With any amazing tool, you need to step back a little bit. I mean, we use a knife to eat, but we also use a knife to hurt people. Same tool, different intention. And so when we're putting information on the internet, we need to think about, what are the intentions of this information? Do I need to give all this information that I'm giving, or can I get away with a little bit less? Think about your privacy. Think about what, if I'm a kid and I'm 17 and I can drink, 12 16-ounce cans of your favorite beverage in a really fast amount of time, that might be really impressive to all my other 17-year-old friends. And so I might write a story and take a picture and put it on my Facebook page. Wow, he's impressive. He can drink a six-pack in 30 seconds. Well, when you go to apply to Harvard, they're going to do a Google search on you. And they're going to find that you're a power drinker. And guess what? You're not getting into Harvard. Now, they admit that they do that now. 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, they would not admit on officially to either myself or the Boston Globe reporter that I was working with at the time to write this story. Nobody would admit it. In fact, this Globe reporter called 58 colleges and universities in the Boston area, and not one of them would officially admit to Googling people's names as part of the application process.
Interesting.
2 years ago, they almost all admit that they do it now. It's a standard practice, and it makes a lot of sense. But companies are doing it, schools are doing it. Now, here's the sad part, and this comes back to how long data remains on the internet. I do a search for Harold Belbin. Well, if there's more than one, it's really easy to confuse their information with my information. So what happens if I'm applying to Harvard and I'm a good kid, I'm a hard worker, I've never drank a beer in my life, I do all my homework, I do all these extracurricular activities. I deserve to go to Harvard because I've worked really hard to get there. But there's somebody else with my name who's power drinking. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to look at that information and know who it really belonged to. And the worst part is there's no way to repudiate it. So if something false gets out there, there is no way to remove the false information from the internet.
So how would a school differentiate if a school looked at, giving your example, if the school looked at that and they saw two Mr. Belbins, do they just
one who's a lot of fun and one who's boring?
Do they give the good one the benefit of the doubt, or do they call both of them in and say, which one of you did this? Or, I mean, they don't really have time to do all that, too.
They don't, because the application process is so intense. But I have to assume, and I don't know this for sure, but common sense would tell me that portion of your application is one small piece. And if there's some question, I would hope that those people would understand that it's not the person you found on the internet isn't always the person that's on the application in front of you. I would hope that there's that level of discretion or evaluation that when they look at this, they go, this doesn't fit with the rest of the application. I remember when I was...
Character.
It is. It's all about character. And a lot of people, using your head on the internet is something that a lot of people, I think, aren't actively using. I mean, you have this wonderful tool. It sits on your shoulders. It's not just a hat rack. You can use it to think. And when you're looking at things on the internet, you need to be thinking about what else is going on. There's, they always say read between the lines. Mm-hmm. Before you put information out there, you need to think about what's taken place. Anytime you see information on the internet, if you find it once, there's no way to know if it's any good. If you find it in 100 places and they're all reputable locations, now that information has some credibility. So when I'm doing a reverse lookup on somebody, I would hope that somebody would say, wow, he's got a great application, and I found this one thing about him, and I don't know if it's him or not. I would hope that they would be balancing that. But life is often unfair, and when people are busy, they tend to gloss over things and move along quickly, and they just go, that's him, and they throw and that's it, and you don't get a fair shake. And that's how unfair the internet is right now. It is incredibly amazing. It is incredibly vicious and unfair. It is a hostile world. I mean, a lot of people romanticize the Wild West 200 years ago. What they don't realize is what a rough place it was to go. There was a reason why everybody was armed. In the internet, you need to be armed with your brain. You need to be thinking about what's going on, because the information lasts a long time. It's not always accurate, and there's no easy way to get rid of it once it's out there, even if it's false.
Okay. So wrapping up, what are some bullet points we can wrap up with this segment with? I mean, just use your head, know who you're talking to. Just think that when you're sending an email or a blog, just kind of make the assumption that hundreds of people are going to be looking at it, even though you think it's private. And we didn't really get into spyware or to viruses or anything like that, but be careful of those things too, because anything that looks like it might be dangerous, you shouldn't, or anything that you don't recognize, maybe just don't click on it. Maybe that's a good rule of thumb too.
I think that's a great, it comes back to using your head. If it doesn't look right, probably isn't.
Yeah.
Take a minute before you click on it, before you're impatient, go, stop pestering me.
Yeah.
Take a look at it, see what it is, because a lot of times the spyware guys, they're pretty lazy. They're going. It's a numbers game for them.
Sure.
They infect your machine. They're able to drive you through to some of these links, and they get paid. There's money involved in that. A lot of money. The internet's a wonderful thing. It can be used safely if you take a little bit of time to think about how do I want to use this? How do I want to safely navigate it? How much information do I really need to put out there?
Yeah.
You know, and do I want my children to be in this place that's the equivalent of a bar room where everybody's had a bunch of drinks? Do I want to leave them there unescorted? Because even a 17 or 18-year-old can be fooled. Plenty of adults can be fooled.
Sure.
The stories vary widely. There's a lot of talent out there. It's not all used for good. You just need to balance a little bit of common sense and a little bit of healthy caution, because it's a wonderful tool. And I'd hate to see people not use the internet for all the wonderful things you can, but you do need to be careful, because there's a lot of people out there whose only goal is to separate you from your money. And they get their money by getting your information. That is the currency of the internet, is information. And so if you protect your information, you're not giving it away.
My thanks again to Harold and to the folks at Visiting Geeks for teaching us about the internet. If you have questions about cyberspace, the internet, or just computer problems in general, contact Visiting Geeks. Again, they're in Merrimack, Massachusetts, and the phone number 978-346-4087. Their web address is www.visitinggeeks.com. As we always do, we leave you with the beautiful music of the equally beautiful Sarah Melson. You may find Sarah's albums on YouTube, Facebook, Amazon, iTunes, and of course, sarahmelson.com. The song is called Happy Endings. Until next time, I hope all of your endings will be happy endings. I'll see you then.
I guess I just never realized how badly I needed to be surprised. You kissed me with your eyes, that's when I knew. Now I'm 1,000 miles away, waiting for the first light of day. And the way I'm feeling is oh so new. And I believe in happy endings, and I only see the good in you. And I believe the world is worth mending. I think that you do too. I know that you're an optimist. You're pretty impossible to resist. And I know you've been used for all your wealth. It's okay, you can take my